Hi guys, welcome to the Merry Boozers channel. Today we're going to be doing a history of the evolution of the RC radio. With me today is a man that I call a mentor, that I learned. He was one of the first people I met when I started flying radio control model airplanes in the early 80s. I don't know of any other man that has the experience that this person has. Charles, it's great to have you on the channel.
Great.
We've talked about you in the past, or I've talked about you in the past. The biggest story I ever told you about you might be a little bit of fib, but it was when you fascinated me the most in the early 80s. We would have those glitches, or you'd lose an airplane, but I think the most amazing thing I ever seen you do is totally crash a balsa airplane on a Saturday, and you'd have it completely finished the next day. Now, am I telling a fib, or am I
No,
not? Okay.
no, that's right.
All right.
That's
So,
right.
that's not a totally. And that was a 40 size airplane
40
with
size.
a 40 size two-stroke engine. That was, I don't think that was before
The four strokes.
or anything like that. So I'm not lying to you. He affirmed that, and this man was also just an amazing scratch builder. I mean, he didn't have to have a kit. All he had to have is an idea, and he'd sit down and go, I think I can make this work. This guy is just. Now let's give a little bit of background of what your history was as far as what you did for a living. Now, you started in automobile repair in the 50s, right? Late 50s?
Yes, yeah.
And you
57.
you transferred over and said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to own my own shop. And you started that in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And you ran it up to, well, you're still doing it a little bit at your house, but you retired about 5 years ago, right? 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So he owned his own auto repair business, and he also did machining,
Mm-hmm. Machine work.
Mm-hmm. And Charles always said to me, if a man built it, I can either build it or repair it. And I truly believe that, guys. So this man has skills that a lot of us would envy to have. And I always envy Charles. And Charles got tired of me. In my RC experience, I'd go to a snag and I'd come over to Charles and say, Charles, how do I do this? And this was when you had to build things, like you had to get the incidents right on the wing saddles, or you had to make sure it had washout on the wings, and you taught me a lot about that. But anyway, that gives you a kind of an idea of what Charles did for a living. But now, one of Charles's most passion things, and I think he was just like I was the first time you seen anything that could fly on its own, you had to find out how it worked, right, Charles?
Yep.
So we're going to start. We got a bunch of radios out here that is going to give you kind of a history from the beginning to almost the 2.4 gigahertz. We don't have a 2.4 gigahertz, but we go right to that edge before they changed over. And you guys know what those are. But what we're going to do, and I'm going to try to get Charles to kind of give you an idea of what and how primitive this was in the time scale that it happened. So Charles, let's kind of delve in your memory and what we're going to go through these radios, and you're going to give them an idea of how
Complicated.
how primitive it really was to start with a controlled, radio controlled aircraft.
Yeah.
Now we're going to, I'm going to try to make 2 sessions of this so you guys can understand the electronics, is what we're going to talk about today on this little segment. And then we're going to do, if time allows and Charles don't get tired and throw me out of the place, we're going to talk about his evolution of building, of what he started with, that kind of thing. We'll probably talk a little bit about the airplanes because you can't talk radios without talking about how the airplane was built. So I'm going to try to do another segment kind of on the evolution of sizes, where you started, and to go up to the big stuff today. Charles, you also have an AMA, or your card was like had a 4-digit, 5-digit, 5-digit. You look at your AMA card today, most of them's like 6 digits, 7 digits.
More than that.
Yeah, but he's got a 5-digit AMA card, so that would go back into the 60s when they brought in AMA.
Yeah, 62 is when I got
Okay,
mine.
so to give you an idea, Charles, when was you? Okay, so your memory. What was your first experience with any kind of
Model airplane.
model airplane?
I was 11 years old, and my dad got me a Cox 049 U-Control plastic model, and that's what I started with.
Yeah.
And I flew that and flew that and flew that till I wore the motor out, and then
So
just progressed from
So
there.
what year would that have been?
54, 55.
55.
Yeah.
So your first experience would be around 1955. Now, not to marriage stars, but Charles is now 77 years old.
Yeah.
To give you an idea, he was born in 1943. I know exactly when he was born because he's pretty close to exactly 10 years older than I am. So to give you an idea of his timeline, he's 77 years old, and here is 2020, so he is now 77. Okay, so you wore out that
Yeah, I wore it plumb out.
Cox thing, and what was your next experience, or how did you find out about something different?
Books, magazines.
Books and magazines.
I read a lot, and we had a hardware store, I guess you'd say, on Main Street, not Main Street, 87, Greg Street,
Okay.
and they carried a few model airplane engines, and I saved up my money and went down and bought a McCoy 25 and put it on the next airplane that I built, and I give $4.70 for
So I'm taking that McCoy 75 was a engine.
Yes, McCoy 25.
25.
Yeah.
25. Okay. So
Yeah.
and they were sized just like they are today as far
Yes.
as gas engine and okay, 2-stroke.
Two-stroke.
2-stroke.
Mhm.
Okay. So so when you bought that, was it a free flight?
No, U-Control.
U-Control, still
U-Control.
U-Control.
U-Control,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Still
Yeah,
U-Control.
it was, the U-Control motors didn't have a carburetor. They had a Ventura with a mixture in it, and you just cranked it up and it was wide open.
Wide open.
And you
Okay.
went,
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe that store that you're talking about was DeBrell's.
No,
No.
the Braille's came after this
After
one.
that, well, my first U-control airplane came from, it was a P-40 and it was a Cox, and it was come from DeBrell's Sporting Goods store.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was somewhere about 62, somewhere in there when I got my first experience
Yeah.
with a U, but it didn't last very long. My uncle and my dad did more flying or more crashing than I did. I don't think I ever got a hold of it. But anyway, so here we are with that airplane.
Mhm.
So you flew that one?
Yeah, I flew U-Control plumb up to 64.
64.
Yeah,
1964.
yeah. Several different configurations, ringmaster and wing and several different ones. And I flew U-Control up to then. And then I was lucky enough to come across that.
How did that happen?
A friend that was in U-Control had got it and didn't want it.
Okay, so we're talking about the blue box
Yeah.
on your left. Which now, Charles, pick up that. Show them the box. This is the first radio-controlled handheld transmitter. Now that is a transmitter, and that's all there is. Now explain to them exactly what's on that box. Of course, you got an aerial. It was by frequency, right?
Right.
Okay, so you're talking about a frequency.
Uh-huh.
And
Of course, you have power, battery,
right,
off and
on
on.
and on. And
And your airplane was usually a balsa airplane with an 049 or a 25 or something like that, with very big wings and lots of dihedral in them, and a fixed elevator. You had about 3% up elevator, and the button controlled the rudder. So many clicks one way, so many clicks back to neutral, so many clicks back the other way. You cranked it up and you launched it and you put it in a circle and it flew up. And then you clicked it to neutral and it would fly a straight line. The bad thing about it is they didn't have enough power to combat the wind here. So you had to really pay attention and keep it headed into the wind to you, or else you chased it 3 or 4 miles down, because it flew till it ran out of gas.
now, I didn't mention that. I'm here visiting from Florida, where we normally live. You guys know that we live in Florida, but I originally come from Texas, and we're here in Big Spring, Texas, and Charles still lives in Big Spring, and we're here on a visit. And I could not resist having him on the channel. So this is very interesting. I mean, now, when you hit that click button, don't I remember you said there was a rubber band in there and you only had so many clicks?
That's right. The escapement, or what they call servos nowadays, was powered with a rubber band. You wound it so many times, and then if you played with it too much, the rubber band unwound and you had no control. So then you just waited till it come down.
And you had to wait till it ran out of gas.
The receiver was so delicate that you hung it on rubber bands in the middle of the fuse where it could dance.
Now this is 1964. Now that seems like a lifetime for some of these guys that's 20 years old. But
Yeah.
to me and you.
As yesterday.
1964, you would have been 21. I would have been, no, I would have been
21,
11, you'd
22.
been 21.
Yeah.
So, okay, now, so you did that for how long?
I didn't do escapement, but well, I did it long enough to acquire another box,
Okay.
which had 2 channels.
Okay, so pick that channel up, that box up. It looked, you know, you got to remember that, guys, these things are these are getting to be
Antiques.
way antiques.
But it's basically just like this one, except it had 2 channels.
Okay,
And of course, on and off switch. Aerial's gone out of it, but
but this is what
Excuse me.
a metal box, guys. This is what they look like. So
and basically worked just like
Sorry,
this
now.
one. You had 2 escapements in it instead of one.
One
One
for
for
rudder.
the elevator and one for the rudder.
no ailerons yet.
No
You just-
ailerons,
But which we still do today. A lot of the electrics. They started with the
Power, elevator, and rudder.
You didn't have it. So
Yep.
the only thing you don't have there is you can't control the power.
I don't.
How long was normally a flight?
Usually about 4 to 5 minutes.
45 minutes.
Yeah.
So you had a tank in your.
Yeah.
In your
Back then, the tanks was actually made on the motor, unless you got above an 049, and then you had to put a tank
Put a
in,
tank
and
in.
they was metal soldered together.
So that was 1965,
Yeah.
66, somewhere
Yep.
in there. So now, now we go to the next radio, which.
Well, actually, there's one in between here.
Okay,
66, I bought a Little Red Brick,
okay.
place out of Fort Worth or Dallas. It was a 2-stick, and they called it a Little Red Brick because the receiver and the 2 servos were made in 1 brick, and it was a 2-channel. And I flew that for, let's see, I got my first single stick in 67,
Okay.
68, somewhere
So-
right along there.
So with that, you only had 2 channels again.
Yeah,
So you only had rudder and elevator.
right.
Still can't control the power.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Nope.
Now, did you, on the first 2 radio, I remember this one, and I want to make sure they understand. Did you have to put your receivers together?
Yes.
Okay, so guys, you didn't get that as a part. You got parts and pieces and you had to sit down and solder all the.
Put them all together, yeah. Connections, all of it.
You had to build that radio.
Yeah.
You didn't get it. Anybody want to do this? I don't think so. But anyway, you had to be dedicated. What I was trying to get over is you had to really be dedicated to want to do this.
You had to be dedicated.
Now,
yes.
Okay, so we're one in between these and we don't have it, but what was that?
The Little Red Brick, and then
Okay.
from that I went to a Heath kit.
Heath, and now a lot of people have talked about Heath kits. And what was the big revolution about a Heath?
Well, at the time it was brand new, revolutionary.
Right.
You could buy it assembled, ready to go, or you could buy a kit.
Which now you're sitting down.
Newly married and kids, I had to buy the kit.
So you're sitting down and you had, how long did it take you to solder that radio together?
Took me about a week in the evenings after I got off
But now,
work.
guys, he's kind of an exception to the rule. I guarantee you, possibly, that would relate to other guys as far as a month or something. I'm just telling you, I've seen this guy work, and when he says a week, a regular guy would probably be a month, but that's my opinion. But okay, so
Okay.
you sat down, and what was the big thing about the Heath kit? What?
Single stick,
Single stick, but
5 channels.
5 channels.
5 channels.
Ooh.
Well, I could control everything.
Oh yeah, 5 channels. And what? Well, in those days, was there any kind of retracts being
No.
made? No retracts.
No.
So 5 channels would have been your basic 4 channels to fly the airplane.
Right.
You know.
Right.
But what would be the 5th channel ever used for? Some kind of bomb drop or
Yeah,
something?
really
You could
anything.
Hook
Yeah.
to it. At this time, that went to where now you started getting a servo, correct?
Yes, yes.
Now we're going to show you that Charles has got one of the early servos out there. It's a little red thing over there, and it kind of looks like a servo of today. Okay, so you're getting some kind of servo like this, right?
Yeah.
With that Heath kit.
Yes.
Did you
yes.
have to put those together
Yes,
too?
had to assemble them too.
And make sure they work.
Mhm.
Okay, now this is 60.
This is 67, 68.
67, 68.
Yeah. And I flew it a whole 2 weeks, 3 weeks. At the time, we had a little short field, the club did, wasn't but a block long. But we had a base here, Air Force Base, and I was out flying one day and come in and landed, and this guy approached me and wanted to know where I got the radio, and I told him, well, I built it, it's a Heath kit. And he asked me if I wanted to sell it. And I said, not really, it's the only one I got. He said, well, that's the only single stick I've ever seen, I want it. So he made me a price and I sold it to him.
Now guys, if you don't know, you're looking at a single stick radio right here. They do not make them anymore that I know of, but I'm going to let Charles tell you exactly how this worked. You don't have the 2-stick radio like you have here. You had a it was a pretty neat idea, and I don't know
A whole lot easier for me to fly.
I don't know why it kind of went away, but so that took you to the Heath, and
Yeah.
it was a single stick just like this.
Just like this.
Now, did you buy that Heath, or did you go to something else?
No,
By that time, did it develop to something else?
Well, by that time, Kraft had come out with a single stick.
Okay.
Because I had to wait a little while before I bought another one. And I bought a Kraft single stick, which I haven't got one of them here. It's real early. Yeah, this Kraft.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this Kraft radio is about 69, 70
Yes, yes.
in there.
Mhm.
Okay. So it's a 5
channel.
5 channel. Okay.
5 channel.
So they stayed with okay, but now still again yet guys, I gotta have one radio, one airplane. You can't do anything else. You
That's it.
wanted another airplane, you had to buy a whole new radio.
Another radio.
Even though you had it on the same channel, you had, well, but you couldn't end adjust anything. You adjusted it for that airplane, and that you couldn't. If you tried to fly
Well, there was
another
no
airplane,
endpoint adjustments or anything
nothing,
like that.
Nothing like that.
So you set it up the best you could, flew it, and any modification you had to make, you had to land it, manually do the modifications, and then refly it.
But it does have trim
Trim to an extent.
to an extent.
Yes.
But it's not like trimming them today.
Mhm.
If you got it a little, if you had a plane that was, you could only adjust it so far.
Yeah,
Then you have to land it and start screwing down your servo
linkage.
and get it better. And then you'd finally get it to where it was.
You get your
What
trim
you need.
back in the center to
Yeah.
where you have,
So that's how that worked. You had to get it back to center to have any adjust. So if you flew it and you had to crank it all the way to the left, that's all you had.
you
So
land it and then adjust and put it
Then
back in neutral.
and then you get it. Then you could. And by that time, normally, unless you crashed it,
Yeah,
you had it pretty well.
yeah, that's,
Where it was
Real
flying.
flyable.
Well, and it would change, kind of like today. Every once in a while, you go out and you have to re-trim your airplane a little bit. Then you could, the same thing back in those days. You could re-trim your airplane. I don't know if something moved or something. Anyway, humidity, anything
Weather.
like that. So you had to do that. So here we go. We're pretty well into the technology that you know of today, and that's 6970.
mhm.
But now explain to them how the single stick worked,
Well, it's pretty simple.
as far as controlling the airplane.
Yeah, you got your elevator,
Yeah, just
you got your ailerons, and you got rudder.
rudder. You twisted the knob.
Right,
Now, where was the speed control?
right here.
Right there. You actually only flew it with this. It was
Controlled
holding
it, yeah.
just like that, and you're over there controlling it like this, which it looks odd to you guys, but if you ever flew one and got used to it, it was
It's-
kind of a neat way to fly.
It's real simple.
Yeah, it's real simple. So you get the idea of a single stick radio. If you ever heard of a single stick radio, there they are. And Kraft was the
Kraft was on one for a long time.
yeah, and they
And then
were
Futaba come
the
in.
Kraft radios were top of the line. You
Yeah.
couldn't get any better than Kraft, and that was all the way. You guys were still flying Kraft radios when I joined the club in 1982,
Yep,
and that leads in the segue of the next radio, which is the Futaba Gold. Futaba was not that great, but they really start hitting their pace in the late 70s, early 80s.
early 80s, I would say.
Yeah, I'm gonna say the first radio I had. This is probably a 6-channel or something. I don't remember. Of course, you get to get AM and FM. The AMs were cheaper,
Yeah,
and the
all mine's
FMs
FM, but you could get either
but you
one.
could get an AM or FM radio. But the frequencies, and I don't know if you guys ever heard about frequency boards, you young guys, but the frequency boards, you had to check out on the frequency board, and another guy might have the same frequency you did. So if you happen to turn your radio on when he was on, there's going to be a crash happening somewhere.
Right.
So you had to be really careful about.
Well, that's why they had the board.
That's
If you're
why they-
flying, you take the pin off the board.
Yep.
And
Nobody
before
could-
you fly, you go up and check the
Check.
board. Make sure that there's not anybody
And
on
there
your
was
frequency.
like, how many frequencies? There was like, I'm gonna guess like 20 or 30, something like that. And then-
27, I think.
Okay.
27 or 28.
Yeah, something like that. And then the ham operators could, if they were a ham operator, they could get their own ham operator frequency
Mm-hmm.
and fly their planes on the ham
Frequency.
frequency.
Yep.
But that's, and then that was just for airplanes. Then they had so many frequencies for cars and boats that was
Mhm.
separate from that,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That's how you kept the cars and the boats separate. So all that was all frequency. So anyway, Futaba 2-stick radio, still the same adjustments as this. No,
Mhm.
you had to do the trimming of the airplane the same way.
Same way.
You had, mine had we started getting retracts
Yes.
in the
yes.
well, now I don't know about the 70s. We talked about this. This was 69. Then I went to, this was like 82.
Mhm.
But where did the retracts start coming in?
Right after this.
Okay, so somewhere in the 70s,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you started being able to do.
Well, Kraft actually started making electric retracts about then.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because all I ever seen was the
Air.
robot air.
Yeah. No, I've got some Craft Electric somewhere, but,
So the electrics were first.
Uh-huh.
I'll be darned, I thought they did that after. See, I'm learning something there. Okay, so here we go through the 70s, and we're able to get retracts, maybe flaps, maybe bomb drops, that kind of stuff. But
according to how many channels you had.
right, and by the time I was along, you could start with the basic 4-channel radio. You could get a 6 and then an 8.
6, and then it wasn't very long until you got an 8, and then they come out with a 10 and a 12.
Right. So that was in the 80s. But now, the 80s were still kind of primitive, guys, even though it was 1980. You didn't have any kind of really programming.
No programming at all.
No programming. So that's the big thing about the 80s. You started getting all the controls of your surfaces, but you didn't get that the computerized
side of it.
yet.
Yeah, you couldn't
Now,
program anything. You had to manually adjust everything.
Anything you think about during that? But that's basically the 70s and 80s, right? Then comes along the early 90s.
Yep.
And Charles has got, we said that they quit, but this is a
That's a
Futaba.
Futaba.
Yeah, Futaba, actually, this was somewhere in the early 90s, wasn't it? Or in
late
the
80s or early 90s,
Yeah.
yeah. That one's programmable.
Right. This is probably the first effort for programming a radio. It's called the PCM.
Yeah.
And it was the cat's meow of the day, because I remember this thing was a really expensive radio.
Yeah.
For its
yeah.
day. It was really expensive, and it was the only single stick radio
Available.
that at the time. Everybody else had been to 2-stick.
Yep.
But here we get the programming.
Yep.
Now, do you remember how many, could you do multiple?
Airplanes, yes.
Okay, so we went to programming and multiple planes, but
Yep.
it wasn't like 3 or 4 or 5 or something.
No, 6.
Okay, 6 out.
6.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. Man, I can fly anything I want to now.
Yeah. Now remember, about this time, well, another thing I wanted to mention, about this time is the first time I seen a Durafly airplane made of PVC.
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't break it.
Yeah. Well, you
Durafly-
could, but it was real hard.
Real hard, but this thing was made out of PVC pipe.
That's right.
But in this time period, they come out with the first, let's call it an ARF. I don't think it came with, it didn't come with the, anything installed in it. You installed it,
no.
and it flew on like a 40
Yeah.
size 2-stroke motor,
Mm-hmm.
and they called it, you can't hurt it,
Yeah.
but you could.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And anybody,
Any of them can be hurt.
You can hurt a brick if you want to. But anyway, this is the time period, guys. If you wanted to know when the first, that you
Programmable.
didn't have to build it,
Oh, yeah.
plane came along, just to give them a history, is right here.
Yes.
Now we're into, this is the 90s. And we do this kind of technology, but this is kind of rare to have the single stick. The 90s were more, everybody was flying the 2-stick.
Everybody, yes.
And, but if you really was a die-hard on that single stick, you bit the bullet and
I bit the bullet and bought
bought
one.
this thing.
Matter
And
of fact,
I
bought two.
remember this thing was like $1,200.
Yeah, it was, well, it was 800 and something.
I mean, that's a bunch of money. That don't sound like much today, but in
That's a lot of money back
that's
then.
a lot of money. So anyway, so we progressed to here. Now we go to, everything is still on a frequency. So we progress into let's say the end of the 90s and around the turn of the century, right? That sounds weird, don't it?
Yeah,
2000?
it sounds
20
crazy.
years ago. Here we are 20 years ago, or right before, this was right about the turn of the century.
Yeah, it was.
Now we get what?
Spectrum?
No, but what do we get? We get the first,
Programmable 2-stick.
and we get to see it here,
Yeah,
what we're doing.
on the screen. Yeah.
On the screen, we're seeing We can go in there and make adjustments in the screen. We've got all the everything that kind of you're thinking about today that you do with your radios today was here in this radio, but it only had a little screen about this size. And it was kind of primitive as far as what you're looking at today, and it was a hell of a lot harder to program. I mean, you had to get the book out every time.
Every time you done anything.
But you could do it, but if it was a little bit clunky, but you could do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you had, this was a kick-ass radio. This was, I mean, look, it looks like your radio today with all the buttons and switches. You could do everything on this radio that you're doing today. I mean, you know, your gear and your rates. You had the multiple rates, dual rates on your, I mean, you guys know all about this, but this is where all that came from. And all these buttons down here was do your programming through your screen down here, all these buttons here. Now today we have a little roller over here.
Yeah.
But now you had, I mean, this was the hard part of this, is which, let's see, I had to hit this button and you'd have to go, it said mode and select and curse and data and input and all that stuff.
Yep.
And it was kind of clunky, but it worked.
It was a pain in the rear.
It was a pain in the rear. But here we go, kind of this 2000, you're getting the same controls as you do today. Now, here we go to the last one. And there's not a whole lot of difference. This is a Futaba.
Yeah, it's a Futaba.
But
got a little bigger screen.
The little bitty screen. Now you got this screen. I mean, this one here is almost the same as today on your the ones we fly today. Pretty close.
Pretty close.
I mean, but and this was the end of the frequency.
Yeah.
With every one of these, you had to pull this out. You didn't forget to pull it out. Guess what happened?
Gee,
It didn't. Well, it didn't have a.
Flew fine for a little ways.
Little ways, but you remember you had to pull that out every time.
Uh-huh.
And you had a flag over here to if you was really in a real popular
Crowded area.
you had to have a flag that showed the frequency on your aerial antenna. And then if you went to a fly, they confiscated your radio.
Yep.
You had to go to the confiscation. They would take your radio and you'd have to say, okay, I want to fly and I'm on 52 or 44, and you get the clamp and I'd say, give me my radio. And you put that clamp on there on what frequency you had. That's how it worked. When you got through flying, you turned it all in. You collapse the radio. You go back to the impound area. You give them the clamp, and they take your radio back.
Right.
So that's how that worked. So anyway,
don't have that problem nowadays.
So the next step was the 2.4 gigahertz.
Yep.
And man, was that a freedom and a half.
Yep.
Who had to worry about, well, another thing, that we're going to talk briefly about radio interference. All this time, if you happen to be, there was certain places that you could get hit. What we called, I'm getting hit.
Yeah.
And you lose control of your airplane.
Yep.
And what was the first thing you did? That was amazing. What the most of
go to the airplane.
You'd start running like a bat out of hell towards that airplane, going, come on, because you didn't have control of it at the top, but it was called getting hit.
Yeah.
And
ham operators mainly.
Right. So
there was some companies that had radios for, I don't know,
two-way radios and pickups. And,
yeah.
And
they will interfere with.
Well, the police had radios in the cars, and they all run off of towers. And then businesses had radio. There were emergency city radios.
Yep.
I mean, there was always a lot of ways to get.
You always kept your airplane close when you flew.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we didn't have to fly it.
No.
We could get it, but you was. I never did get hit that often, but I did. I experienced that. So there's another thing you had to worry about then. But the biggest thing I'm trying to get to every one of you, now you kind of understand from where the evolution of electronics has came in the last
40 years.
longer than that. I hate to tell you, but we're kicking along about
50 years, 60 years.
60 years. We're kicking along 60 years of evolution as far as your radio. So
Yeah.
Charles, great to be here, man. I'm just blown away that you still have all your stuff. You've always been really kind. Everybody that was ever interested in radio control, you
Tried to help 'em.
always tried to help them. And the club in this, how long was the club here? When did it start?
I joined the club in,
It was called the Big Spring Model Aircraft Association.
right, and I joined it in 65. And it disintegrated about,
About the time about 2010, 11,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And guys, look, one of the things that I wanted to also mention, how many times did we go to the mall and try to promote radio control model air? Oh,
my
tons,
Lord,
didn't we?
yeah.
Every year we would try to obtain more interest or people interested in the radio control world.
yeah,
And what we would do, we'd take all our plans to a mall and we'd set up and we'd answer questions.
right.
And now we only lived in, this town was only like 25,000 or 20,000, something like that. So we didn't have a tremendous, but we wanted to promote the sport, so that's how we tried to do it. And we're going to get into training on the next session.
Okay,
Okay, the training thing goes along kind of with the radios, but if you're interested in what we did today, Charles and I are going to make another video strictly on the evolution of the airplanes. And he did fly helicopters for,
yeah, I didn't care
Brief
for them though.
but okay, so anyway guys, we're glad you're here. I hope this has been interesting. Like, share, and subscribe. Go to our merchandise store. Go to Cali Graphics. We've got some new Papa Girls out there that if you like some neuters, they're out there now. And I hope you come back and see us again. And until next time, fly with your friends. I got one right here that's been with me a long time. And I wished he was still there. We just happened to get separated. But all right, see you on the next video.